Hello, I'm James Preston and welcome to another edition of Executive Corner Expert Talks, exclusive to Kalkine TV. Federal elections will be held in 2022 and they loom as perhaps the most intriguing elections of our lifetime. With a backdrop of 2 years of pandemic-induced woes, state and federal government chaos and power trips, heightening tensions with China and the nation's worst ever housing crisis, voters are motivated for change like never before. One man who may have the answer is Riccardo Bosi. He's the leader of the Australia One Party and he joins me live now on Kalkine. Riccardo, it's a pleasure to have you here.
James, thank you very much for your kind invitation. Good to be here.
Riccardo, let's start with an issue that your party has picked up a lot of traction with, and that is, of course, COVID-19, or more specifically, the reaction of various governments in handling the virus. What's Australia's One's position in terms of, well, everything that's going on with both government reactions and the virus itself?
Sure. Well, the question about whether it was intentionally created or an accidental natural development, or whether it was intentionally released or an accidental release, we'll just put that to one side because that's an issue that will be investigated in due course. But what is without doubt is that the governments, that is the federal and state governments, Liberal Labor governments, their response has been completely over the top. They have destroyed it appears almost by design. They've destroyed the middle class, they've destroyed the economy, and so their response has been completely ridiculous. I ran in the Eden-Monaro by-election last year that occurred, and the question was asked, what would you do about COVID? And my answer was quite simple. Quarantine the sick, release the healthy, open up the economy, let us get back to work. Because nothing they do makes any sense. So our view is very simple. Is COVID real? Probably. Is it causing massive deaths? No. Are the vaccines or the alleged vaccines causing more drama? Without a doubt, because the nurses and doctors are now coming out about that. So our policy is very simple. Quarantine the sick, free the healthy, open up the economy and let us get back to work.
Riccardo, you also spoke at the Freedom Rally in Sydney over the weekend. From the footage I've seen, it looked like the ones in Sydney, that would have been around about 100,000 people. Melbourne was much bigger than that, closing in on about 300,000, 400,000 people, according to the aerial footage and also reports surrounding internet issues, even dropping out because there was just too many people there. Yet we've seen from a number of mainstream outlets that they've estimated about 10,000 people for both. Why do you think it's been reported in such a fashion?
Because they must maintain control of the narrative. And they've lost it, because what's happening now is, and this is great news for Australians, we've got to keep fighting, keep turning up to the protests. But understand this, they have lost control of the narrative. They can no longer say there are 10,000 people there, because when it's blatantly obvious there were far more. And so their lies are now being shown up for what they are. They will now be compelled to start reporting with greater accuracy, only because they're terrified of the consequences if they keep perpetuating these lies. And they are bald-faced lies. We know they're bald-faced lies. It's clear as day to anybody that's paying attention. But as more and more Australians come out, and we've got another rally this weekend, and it's not a protest, it's a rally. We have another one, and the numbers will be huge. And the media will be compelled to tell the truth, because they have been bald-faced lying to the Australian people for decades now.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I saw Mike Carlton on Twitter, for example, was suggesting that you were encouraging sedition recently at the protest, which I had a look at what you said. I saw the video he actually posted, and it was basically saying you need to stand up and vote with your feet. That is very different from suggesting that treason is about to occur and you're about to form a coup d'etat, was the words used there. What do you want people to do? Do you want them to come out and then simply vote for you? Is that the message?
The message is that this is over when we say it's over. When the Australian people realise that the only treason that's been occurring in this country has been with the federal and state governments. They have been operating outside of our constitution. I won't go into too much detail, but understand this, that the government in Canberra is unconstitutional. It has as much right to be in power as my cat. Literally, you could pick 151 people off the street at any pub and say, you're now the Prime Minister and the Parliament, and they'd have as much authority to be there as the current mob. Everybody in Canberra knows it. The bureaucracy knows it, the politicians know it, the judiciary knows it, they all know it. It's unconstitutional. It is one great lie. And so when people like Mike Carlton accuse me of sedition, that's just funny. Now, Mike was a great reporter in his day, and he was quite humorous too. He wrote some great stuff. I'm not sure what's happened to him since then, but my goodness me, sedition. Me, you've got to be kidding. I've dedicated a quarter of a century of my life to defending Australia, and now I'm defending Australia in a slightly different way, which is the Australian people are sovereign. Sovereignty is not granted by the government. The government is created by the people to meet their needs. And when the government becomes destructive to those needs, the people have the right to remove it. Now, when they are as egregiously damaging and destructive and unconstitutional to the Australian people, having a protest saying "get the hell out" is pretty mild stuff. Because I've got to tell you, they have attempted to provoke us into violence. The heavy hands of the law have been allowed to occur to provoke a violent response, but Australians aren't like that. We are decent, good people, and we know that we have to win this with non-violent, non-cooperation. We just withdraw our consent, and that's what we're doing, and that's all that we're doing, and we're winning. And here's hard evidence. They are starting to fall. The dominoes are starting to fall. New South Wales Premier, good-for-nothing Gladys Berejiklian, gone. Alan Jones, media personality, gone. New South Wales Commissioner for Police, Mick Fuller, gone. And so they are now on the back foot. They are struggling to maintain some control. They've already lost. They don't know it, unfortunately for them. Fortunately for us, we do. This will be over before the end of the year. January 2022 is going to be a great year for us and not so great for the elites.
Riccardo, can I ask, as you mentioned there that you can't go into too much depth about it to do with illegitimate governments, what's the foundation of your thoughts on that? Is there something to do with it hasn't been properly enacted given that we're part of the Commonwealth, or how exactly does that work?
Oh, there's any number of ones, and I'm happy to go into more detail, but there's any number of reasons how they are unconstitutional. They are changing the Constitution whenever they want to. If you have a look at the original Constitution, 1901, it's only been lawfully amended 8 times by referenda, and that's the only way the Constitution may be amended. In fact, the Founding Fathers said there is much to be written in our Constitution, but the pen lies firmly in the hands of the people. Only a referendum can change the Constitution. Now, if you get a copy of the 1901 Constitution in the red leather binding and buy a copy of the current one, which is in a green leather binding, you'll find more than 8 amendments. It is just unconstitutional, and the politicians just change the rules when they want to. Now, that's one aspect of it. The other aspect was the creation of this fiction, The Queen of Australia, by Gough Whitlam. It is a fiction. It never occurred. So just because somebody signs a piece of paper doesn't make it law. None of this is law. And when the Australian people find out that they have been lied to for decades, they might be a little cranky. But once again, we'll move through this in a calm, measured way to restore constitutional government to this country. And we've been absent that for decades and decades, and everybody in Canberra knows it. It's a house of cards, and it's our job to walk in there and kick the house of cards over, and it will come down. Because the politicians, everybody, the politicians, the judiciary, the bureaucracy, the military, the media, academia, the constabulary, unions, big business, they're all playing this card game. They know it's a lie. It's about to come tumbling down.
Well, Riccardo, we'll touch on how we can potentially vote for your party and also the actual status of your party in just a little bit of time, because I know that's still sort of up in the air at the moment. But I want to come back to COVID for a moment here. There's been a lot of commentary about how to move forward and live with it. But for me, the silence on actually getting to the bottom of how this all started has been absolutely deafening. We've seen Rand Paul and Senate inquiries over in the US rip into Anthony Fauci about funding gain-of-function research for the Wuhan laboratory, where it's now believed the virus actually emanated from. What would you like to see in terms of an investigation from this country and also from other global powers moving forward?
Yeah, we need to investigate the source, as you quite rightly say. Was it intentionally released, accidentally released? Was it intentionally designed, accidentally designed? These two key facts need to be determined. Then on top of that, we need to examine exactly why and how the Australian government has been answering to foreign influence to progress their response, because it is abundantly clear from the evidence, there is plenty of evidence out there, that there are questions about the disease and the efficacy and safety of the alleged vaccines. Now, we know they're not vaccines. They haven't been trialled correctly. The animal trials were ceased because the animals kept dying. And now we are seeing in Australia, and then again, the evidence is there, but the mainstream media won't cover it. But the hospitals are full of the vaccine injured. Now, this is of primary importance to us, because this is a case of genocide. The Australian governments, and that is the federal and state governments, have been working hand in glove with each other to poison the Australian people through the use of these alleged vaccines. Nursing mothers, the babies of nursing mothers are dying 3 days after the nursing mother gets the jab. There are children suffering myocarditis, which is heart inflammation, which is unprecedented. Also unprecedented is the rate of spontaneous miscarriages defamation of babies that are born, it is just through the roof, and yet nobody is speaking out. The media is another group that will be examined, and they will pay the price too, because they have been lying to the Australian people. They have been following somebody's orders, and I can tell you what, it isn't truth, justice in the Australian way. So this series of investigations and inquiries will take years, from governments to bureaucracies to the judiciary, the media and academia, and everybody that's had a role in this. They will have to answer for their crimes, and these are the worst crimes we've ever seen. This is a moment without precedent in world history, an attempt to kill billions of people. And so the question
Riccardo,
is,
can I just ask you, why do you believe that's the case? Why do you think that's the end goal here for the Australian government or other governments?
Because the evidence is there. All you've got to do is turn off the mainstream media for 10 seconds and you can see the pattern of behaviour. Now, setting up the process behind all of this. This reset is nothing more than clearing the decks so people control the planet. Now, you can imagine, for example, a psychopath that just wants to kill for the sheer pleasure of it. That makes sense. Why? Because we've seen those throughout human history. You can now imagine a business person who might be psychopathic, who just wants to acquire as much as they possibly can and kill people in the process. They do that. What about political demagogues that want to control their nation? They'll kill millions in the process of that. So why is it so far-fetched to think that these people can get together and they actually want to control the planet and the people are in the way? They refer to us as useless eaters because that's all they see us as. We're like a mob of roos in the back paddock. Let's kill the roos because I want the farm for myself. There is enough evidence out there that this is exactly what the intention is. And this will be revealed. I know it sounds probably crazy to many of your people, but I can tell you this is nothing but common sense to many people who have done their own research over the years. Now, if you want to know exactly, there is evidence. Let me just see if I can find the book. No, it's not here. At the rally on Saturday, I held up a document called The New International Economic Order Implications for Australia. And this was dated February 1980. And this was the result of a Senate inquiry, the Senate Committee for Foreign Affairs and Defence, into the new international economic order, which requires us to dismantle our manufacturing, dismantle our economy, dismantle our power, hand over our political authority to the United Nations. Now, this is not a foreign document, and there are others. There's the Lima Declaration that Gough Whitlam signed. There's the Club of Rome. All of these events are out there. This is not conspiracy theory. This is their own documentation. And so what we know for fact, and that's why I use that 1980 Australian government document, what we know for fact is that every government, every Prime Minister, every leader of the opposition, every senator has been complicit in the treasonous betrayal of Australia for decades. They've been handing everything over to foreign banks, foreign institutions like the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and even the CDC, the Centre for Disease Control, from whom we are supposed to be taking instructions. It is a private organisation, it is a private company that has the patents, not only for the disease, but also for the alleged cures. And these patents are predating any public awareness of COVID. So there's plenty of evidence that this is real. I'll give you another local one, just so you know that this Australian experience is common to everybody else. In 2016, the West Australian government passed a law which authorised the police to strip your child naked and forcibly inject them with poison. This is their words on the legislation, 2016. Now, as you know, getting legislation through Parliament is a tough gig because there are many competing ideas that need to get up. Now, what occurred in 2016 that would require that sort of draconian legislative response to injecting people with a poison or a vaccine? And the answer is nothing happened. This was set up in order to be ready for the 2019 release of the COVID pandemic. There are too many parts in place for it to be coincidence. This was planned. This was their intention. They know exactly what's going on, and every one of them will be required to answer for what they've done. And that includes the media, who have been silent on this. They have been deathly silent on it. And they know that the people are dying at the hands of the vaccines. Now, one little story that doesn't get in Oz, for example, is the sports people across the world that are dropping dead on playing fields. Now, again, if you watch the mainstream media, you wouldn't know that. But you'll find evidence of fit, healthy young footballers literally dropping dead on the pitch. And Now, that hasn't happened here because my guess is they're probably giving our sports people just saline injections. And the evidence of that, no problem. I was pulled up by two nurses quite independently. They recognised me in the shopping centre and said, I saw the injections that they gave to our politicians, and they're using a 1 mil needle, which is what drug users use. But for this sort of vaccine, you need a 2 mil at least. So I know that these guys were getting something else, probably saline. This is from the professionals. So, 2 and 2 doesn't equal 3, and it doesn't equal 5. So if you look at the evidence, you'll work out for yourself that this is quite intentional, and they know what's going on. They know, and they're controlled. So, and just so we're clear on this, Scott Morrison is not some sort of evil mastermind. Neither are the politicians. They're all sock puppets. We know that. It's the organisation behind them that's driving this.
Well, Riccardo, let's move on for a moment now, though. Let's focus on China squarely and shift a little bit away from COVID itself. I think there's now no two ways about it. This is definitely a hostile nation. It's one that's recently shot and killed protesters in Hong Kong. They've demonstrated increasing aggression in the Pacific and also against Taiwan. And of course, right here in our home soil, they've continued to buy up dairy farms upon dairy farms. Housing crisis is partially compiled from the fact that China continues to purchase property in huge swaths despite not even being citizens within the country. And now, of course, we have the threat of war. So I have to ask, at what point do we ignore the fact that they are our biggest trading partner, put our foot down and cut ties with them? In my mind, if every nation boycotts China, you cut them off at the knee. Why is it that nobody seems to want to do that?
Because there's too much money involved. We have again, don't think the government is working on our behalf. They're not. They're working for everybody else. They are bought and paid for. You don't get the top job unless you're bent or crooked or both. So it has been, Blind Freddy has been able to see for decades that China is a problem. And yet they continually make money off it. This is all about just making money. That's all they care about. And so you've got billionaires that are making big money, like Clive Palmer. Clive Palmer made, I think it's $3.8 billion, it was reported in Forbes, in his dealings with China. Now, China is not a sovereign nation. It is a criminal cartel. This nation is killing Australians. This nation is buying Australia. And yet these people make money with it. So and again, just to give you some evidence, this is not the first time it's happened. And let me just tell you this bit of history so you understand that our billionaires are trading with a murderous criminal cartel and watching us die. Now, has this happened before? You betcha. Henry Ford Motor Company, provided engine for the Wehrmacht in World War II. So there are American GIs and British Tommies and Australian diggers being shot at by Germans, killed and shot at by Germans, and there's the Ford Motor Company providing motors for the Wehrmacht to drive their vehicles. Standard Oil, owned by the Rockefellers, were producing an additive for aircraft engines, high-performance aircraft engines, because at altitude, some of these aircraft, the engine would start to knock. And so this additive was required to continue their high performance. Now, Standard Oil was providing this additive throughout the war to the Luftwaffe, the Nazi Air Force. Rockefeller and Ford could have brought the Luftwaffe and the Wehrmacht to a halt. But they didn't. You know why? Because they were making money. And the billionaires in Australia, who will have some questions to ask just like everybody else, are doing exactly the same right now. They are making money with this criminal cartel called China. That's why nothing is done by it. Because the politicians aren't interested in looking after Australia. All they want to do is get a pay packet and get paid off when they leave. Because, again, this is common knowledge. It's in the history books. It's there. And I've been in this game since breakfast. And how come I can find out this stuff? And our eminent and preeminent and our wonderful political leaders who couldn't organise a piss up in a brewery haven't found this stuff out. So China is our enemy. It has been for decades, and treasonously been assisted by our governments, by our bureaucracy, our military, by the judiciary, everybody.
Well, Riccardo, can I ask you this then? We've got the Beijing Winter Olympics happening next year. Would you like to see that boycotted from our Olympians, or do you think they should continue?
I'd like to see the criminal cartel put up against the wall and shot. We should have nothing to do with China. And by the way, people say, oh, it's not the Chinese people, it's China, it's a CCP. Well, until the Chinese people get off their lazy backsides and take over their country, it's not our job to save them, because they are crushing Australia. They own most of Australia. And by the way, that'll be rectified quick smart. Every square inch of this land that's owned by the CCP or China or a Chinese billionaire, because you don't get to be a Chinese billionaire unless you're a signed up member of the CCP, we will take back with no compensation, and we'll give them 24 hours to get out of the country or they spend the rest of their lives in jail. No, China must look after China. They have spent decades raping this nation. So we're going to throw them out quite unceremoniously, every last one of them. And we're going to take back our country in a very physical sense. No, China Olympics, you're going to be kidding me. Why the hell would you do that? And the only reason is our government is utterly corrupt.
Riccardo, how do we do that though? Is that a matter of enacting policy preventing any foreign ownership? Is that how you would go about that?
Oh, we've got the Foreign Investment Review Board. Slip them a few bucks and they'll get any desire you want. Foreign ownership must be extremely tightly controlled. Extremely. It's just it's a mechanism by which they take money out of the pockets of the people and give it to somebody else. That's all politicians are. So all of that's got to change. Australia for Australians. Because why are we giving away everything that we have to impoverish our people and make other people wealthy? And I'll give you an example of that. Water trading is unconstitutional. Section 100 of the Constitution says you may not trade water. And your good old mate Malcolm Turnbull set up the water trading scheme and made sure that all he and his mates profited from it. But it's unconstitutional. And all the politicians are in on it. So you've got a farmer out there, Mr. and Mrs. Cruikshank from central New South Wales, trying to run their family farm, 4 or 5 generations of working the land, and water went from $60 a gigalitre to $600 a gigalitre. A tenfold increase. Now the farm becomes uneconomical. So they sell out for a dime on the dollar, as my American friends say, and leave. It's then bought up by the corporations, mostly Chinese, and away they go. This is unconstitutional, this is illegal, this is unconscionable. And so we're going to take all that back. So if someone's bought land, now you think of it this way, here's the analogy. Let's keep it very simple. If someone steals your car and then sells it to John Smith, and John Smith, in all innocence, bought your stolen car, the police will come, take the car off John Smith and say, sorry, John, you've bought stolen goods. You get no compensation because you bought it from a crook, and you get your car back. Everybody's happy with that process, no problem. Well, we're going to do exactly the same thing because the federal government unconstitutionally, unlawfully made that land unviable, and the port coerced the farmer into selling. So we're going to take the land back from whoever bought it and tell them, if you want compensation, go see the Australian federal politicians, they'll pay you. But we get that land and we give it back to the original owner and say, this is yours, you can do with it as you like. It was stolen from you, effectively.
Riccardo, just on the subject of land as well, one thing I really want to focus on, because it's something that affects myself and a lot of people in my age bracket, is the current housing crisis, which is just insane at the moment. There was an article recently by, I think, the ABC that suggested a house that just sold for around 2.8 million, if it had tracked standard inflation rates, should actually have only sold for about $300,000 maximum. Now, myself and my partner, we've been searching for property, and unless we're after a 2-hour commute to come into the city to work, we've been priced out of the market. There is no resolution on the horizon. What do you think the solution is outside of what we've just discussed in terms of taking back foreign ownership? Because it goes beyond that, obviously. It's now something which is unfortunately ingrained in Australian culture. What policies would you put in place to try and reverse the current housing crisis?
Oh, it's easier than it sounds. There is a housing crisis because they want a housing crisis. Because property developers are making a mozza. See, the government doesn't release land. And so the land is scarce. Now, here we have a continent, an island continent. We have more space than we know what to do with. And yet the land is constrained. And so the housing prices are falsely pumped up. We had a record house in our area that went for $1.8 million. It shouldn't be worth more than $600-700 max. So I know exactly what you're talking about. So there's 2 parts of it. The availability of housing land, that's controlled by crooked governments, paid off by crooked property developers. That's it. It's just pure corruption. The second reason why you have a problem, and that drives the prices up. Now, the second reason you have a problem is because most people, you're working hard and your partner's working hard and you're trying to get a deposit, but all you can do is get a deposit on a shack 40 kilometres away from where you want to be. And that's because you think you're paying somewhere between 30 to 40% tax, but you're not. With all the hidden taxes, you're paying somewhere between 60 to 70% tax. It's not because you're lazy or stupid or can't save. The system is rigged against you. This is done on purpose. You've got to understand, you're a sheep to be shorn and a cow to be milked, and they don't care. That's all you are to them. No matter which party gets in, Liberal, Labor, Nationals and Greens, they are one party, they are one organisation controlled by the same crooked bastards. And that's why you're having difficulty. So what do we do about that? Well, in the first place, in terms of land, we open up land. Just open it up. We've got hundreds of thousands of hectares of land that could be used for housing, but they won't open the land up. The next thing we do is we put money back in your pocket. Now, we have a taxation plan that there's a phasing in, but at the end of it, all you will ever pay is a 2% expenditure tax. Every other tax goes. The sales tax, the stamp duty, payroll tax, land tax, all of them gone. And effectively, everybody gets a 60 to 70 cent pay rise immediately. Now, the reason for that is simple. They have been destroying the Australian family for decades. They need to undermine it, and if you want evidence of that, please have a look at, go to the internet, look up the 45 goals of communism, and you'll see exactly what they've been doing since the 50s. But the point is this. We want to make sure that an Australian family, only one breadwinner is required to get married, buy a house, raise kids, educate the kids, and leave a little nest egg when they die. Now, that's not too much to ask. So you pay a 2% expenditure tax. That's all you pay. That's it. Everything else is gone, and you're going to be rolling in money. Now, why is that? Because to create wealth, you need three things: leadership, capital, and labour. Leadership is entrepreneurs, people that are willing to get up and take the risk and reap the rewards, and good on them. Labour, we have a workforce that's ready to work hard for a good pay packet. So the one thing they can constrain is capital, and that's why they squeeze capital, to make it hard for innovation to occur and wealth to be created. So we do those two things. We release the land and drop the tax to 2% expenditure tax, and all of a sudden the Australian economy will double and treble in record time, because people will have the money to do what they need to do, and we've got the government off our back. And instead of taxing you and sending the money to somewhere overseas, that's where it's all going. It's not going back in a consolidated revenue so it can be used to build infrastructure. It never does. It just goes overseas. This is a corporation that makes money for its owners somewhere else. And so when we do those two things, we release the land and then reduce the tax to that. And maybe the last part is to put the infrastructure into place. So you could go to regional Australia and repopulate it. We'll have the infrastructure, the hospitals, the schools, the roads, the rail, the airheads, all around in regional Australia to repopulate the countryside. Because they wanted to shove us all into the cities, but we want to repopulate the countryside. And so for your $500 million, you get 5 acres, a beautiful house, chooks in the shed in the backyard, fruit trees, and a great place to raise a family. Now, that
sounds like a very nice vision, Riccardo. I'm more than for that, that is for sure. And I think one thing we need as well is high-speed rail. That would definitely help things out quite a bit. You could decentralise the population a bit more, get them in there, have them out in those country areas where there then still are the opportunities both there and then potentially in the city. We've got to move on just a little bit here. Now, we have spoken a lot about the problems currently afflicting the country. The best way to try and change them is obviously to change the way we are governed, and that's something we've both agreed on quite a bit throughout this chat. Now, I think there is set to be a major swing towards minor parties at the next election, but the big question I've got for you is whether your party will actually be a part of it. As I understand, there's been a lot of roadblocks put in place to prevent A1 from officially being registered. Can you explain what's happened?
Sure. No, that's okay. I think it was, again, Malcolm Turnbull raised the rules for establishing a political party. No problem with that at all. And recently, the Scott Morrison's government raised it from 500 members to 1,500. That's not an issue for us. You can make it 15,000. We'll still have enough members. That's not the issue. What we're doing at the moment is we're registered as a corporation, so we're on the track to do so. We're establishing some very high-level cybersecurity on our own service, and all this takes time and money to get right because we've been attacked electronically since we started. So we have to make sure that the database is secure and the rest of it. But the message to everybody is this: you don't need to be registered as a party to run. And here's the beauty of it, and here's why it doesn't matter. Because I've already run 2 elections, the Monaro by-election and the Queensland state election for the seat of Nicklin as an independent supported by A1. But here's how it's different, and this is key. Parties aren't helpful. They're good in the sense that they can set a set of policies for people that they can either like or dislike, not a problem. But it's actually unconstitutional to have a party. I don't know if you know that, because the Constitution said that people are supposed to directly elect their representatives. But if you go through a party, you're not doing that. Now, what we're going to do is this. If we are not registered as a party by the election, it doesn't matter. We will still have people. Now, we do not select our candidates, and this is why Australia will change in the next few election cycles. Because at the moment, you've got Liberal, Labor, Nationals and Greens, and you elect this buffoon on election night. That idiot ignores you for 3 years and then says, please vote for me again, because there's nothing you can do to get rid of them. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to have recall elections, which means the electorate selects their candidate, they vote for their candidate, and if the candidate turns out to be a busted flush, we have a recall election and they get sacked. What this means is your representative is now responsive to the people in the electorate 24/7, 365 for that entire election period. So that's the fundamental difference. Now, imagine if, and I've said this when I do my tours around the countryside, imagine being in Dan Andrews' electorate and saying, would you like to sack Dan Andrews tomorrow by having a recall election? And the cheer goes up. Now, this is power to the people in a real sense. Now, the moment this simple step to give recall elections to the people, making their representatives responsive to the electorate, not the party machine, is brilliant. So, again, we're going to be established, we're fine. But even if we have independent members elected, supported by A1, those members are responsive to the people of the electorate, not the party machine. Does that make sense? So this is actually super healthy for our democracy, for the way the people are governed, because they can now say, if you do not do what we want, we will sack you. And I know for a fact, I have people knock on my door. So I've got a big sign out the front of my house saying, Australia won, no forced vax. It tends to attract a bit of attention. But I've had people knocking on my door, excuse me, you're Riccardo Bosi? Yes. I just went up to my local MP and I gave him a mouthful because that guy has done nothing to help us on all of these issues. And I said, would you like the capacity to sack him with a recall election? Damn right we would. Well, that's what we're for. So don't worry about whether we're registered as a party or not. The way Australia One selects its candidates is this. If you want an A1 candidate in your seat or an A1 supported independent in your electorate, form the branches and then you select them. Because all we do as head office is we vet them to make sure they're not crooks or pedophiles or something else. They're not bankrupts. But they get to select their candidate. The beauty of that is they hire them, they can fire them. So this is power back to the people. This is a good democracy, a healthy democracy, where the members will have to respond to the needs of their people, not the head office. And so don't worry about whether we're registered as a party or not. That'll happen in time. But they can have an election tomorrow, they can have an election next year. It doesn't matter. We can have independence, and the people of the electorate own that independence. I think that's a healthy thing.
Absolutely. Well, Riccardo, it's been a very big, boisterous chat, that is for sure. Is there any final words you'd like to leave our audience today?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we're coming up. It's very tough at the moment. The lunatics in charge of this particular asylum, the politicians, you've got to understand, they're just puppets, but they are trying to frighten you. But we are so close to victory. Ladies and gentlemen, you've got no idea how close we are. Get out to the rallies, get out to the protests, make your voice heard, because this ends when we say it ends, and I say this should end before the end of the year, and we are so close, ladies and gentlemen. Just get out there and let your voice be heard.
Well, Riccardo, thank you so much for your time today and all the best for the future.
Thanks, James. Lovely to speak to you.
That is Riccardo Bosi, the leader of the Australia One Party. And if you missed any part of that chat, you can catch the full interview by heading to our YouTube channel, Kalkine Media. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with all of our exclusive expert talks. Make sure to keep watching Kalkine for the latest in finance, business and politics. I'm James Preston, signing off for now.